Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's good to see all of you. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the forum. We're glad to have you all here. If you go ahead and find your spots, then we can get started. Okay, we'll visit later. On Earth Day, Suki Bryan installed an art installation on the front steps called Water Without, and it's a representation of California's Bernese Falls, and it's an extraordinary installation. If you came in through a different entrance, you must see it. But both that artwork and today's conversation are connected to the cathedral's exploration of climate change. This year is in our year, a theme for the year is truth. And this is a major part of what we're going to be doing this year for the next 5 months. So we're really grateful for Marc Andrus, who's on sabbatical but came back especially to be here today. We're very, very grateful to have him.
Very grateful to be here.
Marc is the 8th bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of California. He's in his 12th year and oversees a diocese of 27,000 congregants throughout the Bay Area. His leadership has focused on key issues related to peace and justice, immigration reform, civil rights for LGBTQ+ persons, healthcare, and climate change, especially climate change. I think you're especially known for that work. So please join me in welcoming Marc Andrus.
Thank you, Malcolm. It's great to be with you.
I've been looking forward to this so much.
So have I, Malcolm.
I just feel like it's, there's so many times we're kind of passing, and I want to ask you long and more involved questions on things, and there's just so many other people I'm sharing you with, and I'm so grateful that
you're also a really important religious leader in the area of climate and ecology.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So this is great.
Yeah, I appreciate your encouragement in that work, especially. Everybody's been talking about Bishop Michael Curry and his
as they should.
As they should, exactly. And I was wondering, I know that the two of you are very close, and I didn't know whether you had a chance to kind of give him any, you help me on my sermons all the time. Did you have a chance to help him on his royal wedding sermon?
Not at all.
He would have been a wise man to call you.
We had, Sheila and I had dinner with him the Tuesday before the wedding, and he didn't tell us anything about it. And he, because it was a state, this is literally a state secret, right? Wow. So later that week, as I told you, we were in a production of Aristophanes' The Birds in New York on Saturday, and I got a text saying, can you come on BBC to talk about your friend Michael Curry tonight? Yeah. And so began a really interesting saga. So I let Michael know I was doing that. I texted him and said, is it okay?
Right.
So we communicated a lot before the sermon, but the sermon was, all Michael. It was such a evocation of his Christian spirit, of his faith, and, it had the whole embrace of all of creation that he used here,
exactly.
Which was historic in a historic man's preaching. Yeah. When he preached at the Eco-Justice Conference last spring in May of 2017, that was his first sermon where he addressed theologically the earth and climate change. And his shift was to stop talking about the family of God as the human family, and instead say, and it took a little while for people to understand he was making the shift, but he shifted it to the family of God as all of life.
Right.
And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot, because it puts all of life on the same footing in relationship to God.
Yeah, and I look at it in exactly the same way, and it really is a transformative experience for me too, to always be thinking of the whole household of God, in all the creatures, all of nature, all of the world, and that redemption is just not a human activity; it's an activity of God's action in everything.
There's an interesting passage in the book of Leviticus.
Look it up.
In which it says that part of God's teachings, the laws that God is giving to Moses, include, and the people of Israel, include giving the earth its Sabbath.
Yeah.
Now that's a very interesting idea. Who keeps Sabbath? the worshipers of God.
Yeah.
And for us to give the earth its Sabbath means we're acknowledging that the earth has its own relationship to God.
Right.
And that our role is to make sure that it can take its Sabbath and relate to God. For the Hebrew people, that was specified as leaving fields fallow. So that's an we're talking, 800 BCE.
Yeah.
So what would be giving the earth its Sabbath today look like?
Yeah, we were having a conversation before we began about the terrible air pollution in China.
Yeah.
And I did have that thought, like, what if you just stopped, and had a kind of a break, even for 7 days, so that people could really see the sky. So
what that feels like, what that looks like.
Exactly.
We don't know.
We don't even know, exactly. I think a lot of you have a wonderful energy and spirit, and when there's certain people in my life, I see them, I can imagine what they were like as kids. You're one of the few people I can see. Do you know what I mean? Your child self is
That's
still
a worrying
present.
thought.
But I was wondering, just what was your experience of nature as a child?
Wow, that's great.
And because I think that's important.
Yeah, it's formative, right?
Yeah.
So, one of my key questions, and we'll be using it at the Global Climate Action Summit here
in September.
When we host this here in September, on September the 12th. One of my key questions is, what was your first experience of wonder at the natural level?
Yeah.
At either the micro, the human scale, or the macro scale.
Right.
Like, when did you first look through a microscope? When did you look through a telescope? And when did you experience wonder at the scale of the lived experience, at your scale? And I had a lot of those. So I grew up in a small town that was a bedroom community for Oak Ridge.
Right.
So Oak Ridge was, you could say, half of the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, it's like being in Livermore.
It's like being in Livermore, but it's a whole...
In the 60s.
And so that was morally frightening in a way, and confusing. All of my parents' peers had been involved in producing this weapon of ultimate terror and destruction. They all believed it was the right thing. They believed that they were doing the right thing for the United States and for the world. So there was that, but it was an incredibly beautiful part of Tennessee to grow up in. A lot of water, the Tennessee River, the Clinch River, the foothills of the Smokies, the Appalachian Mountains. So I lived in all that. I did a lot of outdoor canoeing and hiking. I also had a horse.
Oh, yeah, right.
And Sir Lawrence Vanderpost lamented the movement for boys away from horses to motorcycles and cars, because he said the relationship of a human... Girls stayed more related to horses. After horses were no longer useful for war, boys moved away, and girls became the main equestrians and so on. But he said that relating to a living being is different than a machine. And they're great beings. I mean, they're so much more powerful than we are. But then when you're writing, you realize that you've made a partnership, that you're communicating at this very deep level. And when we moved to Middleburg, when I became rector there, I learned how to jump.
Wow.
And so I was writing Western in Tennessee.
Yeah.
But in Middleburg, jumping, you're in midair, and this horse and you are suddenly in this... the horse is not stronger than you, and you're not stronger than the horse. You've got to do this together, and it's this it's mystic, and it's a small example of the relationship between us and all of the natural order.
Well, I was thinking about that too. I mean, I remember reading different accounts of people who saw the first photographs of the Earth from space.
Yeah.
And I think too, for me,
it's transformative.
When I was younger, I just felt like nature was always going to be there, and there was nothing we could do to damage it, or really fundamentally alter it.
Yeah.
And it was a really change in my consciousness to realize, we could destroy the whole thing.
So Malcolm, that's super important. we are calling this age that we're beginning, in terms of the planetary ages, the Cretacean, we're in the Holocene, we're in the later parts of the Holocene. The new age we're moving into is being called the Anthropocene.
Right, exactly.
And that means that we are the determining factor in the shape of the planet.
Yeah.
And one of my ecological heroes, Larry Rasmussen, says that we're factors, we're co-evolving. But I think he's mistaken when he says that, because evolution, according to Bergson, has these two factors that we've talked about, which is increasing complexity and increasing integration.
Yeah.
Not all of life, not all of the planetary moments are evolutionary.
Right.
Some are devolutionary.
Right.
And the Anthropocene, yes, we are factors, we're the determinative factors for the direction of the planet's movement, its life, but they're not positive factors.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Devolutionary factors.
Yeah.
And this is part of the truth of climate change, is that we've moved into climate instability.
And the problem with
we've done it.
Evolution is a metaphor too. I mean, because it's not. I mean, it's an image. It's a system of symbols that we use to describe what's happening. There's ways in which it's very appropriate. And there are ways that it's not so appropriate too. And,
Right.
I mean, social systems. You could use the metaphor to describe them as evolutionary.
Yeah.
But there's a different element involved.
Right.
And that's what we're facing too.
And this has to do with again, with the truth piece. We have concealed the truth from ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, all this is available.
Right.
But we are continuing to conceal the truth about climate change from ourselves. One of the things that we know is that we are not meeting the Paris Agreement goals.
Right.
So, what's the cost of that?
Yeah.
What will happen if we do not keep the warming well below, this is the words of the Paris Agreement, well below 2 degrees C,
right.
Above pre-industrial levels?
Yeah.
Well, half a degree, so what we really should be aiming at is 1.5.
Yeah.
We put well below 2 in the Paris Agreement, and we're not meeting that.
Yeah.
And the cost is dramatic.
Right.
And we actually can know that. We can know how extreme that will be. And what we're really masking from ourselves is what will our children and our grandchildren and all the generations of life on the planet experience, because we are concealing the truth from ourselves about the present.
Yeah, we had a hydrologist named Maurice Hall from the Environmental Defense Fund, and it was so fascinating because we had this involved conversation about hydrology, how different basins hold water in different ways, and ways of managing water, and cooperation between different water districts. And at the end of everything, what he said, the biggest environmental problem we have is misinformation.
Misinformation.
I mean, I couldn't believe that a hydrologist would be
say
his take.
Well, this is it.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that too. I mean, so we have the American Meteorological Society. We've got their report here. We've got a few meteorologists who are here in our audience, and it's so clear to anyone who's studying the issue exactly what's at stake, and that this is caused by emissions, et cetera. So why do people not believe this, and how have those forces become so ascendant in the United States?
Okay, this is a crucial question that you're asking, and I think there are two pieces to it. The first is maybe the biggest one, and that is there is no larger exercise of the collective human will that we have ever experienced in humanity.
Than 2015.
Then the movement to decide that we will move from industrial society to sustainable society.
Right.
It will be, it's a revolution. I don't even know if that sums it up. It'll be a change in life that is so huge that we are deliberately misinforming ourselves because we don't want to do it.
Right, right.
That-
It's such
that's
a
the
massive
big,
change.
It's so massive.
To
So-
imagine that all human beings on the planet, in some way or another, are working in a coordinated fashion for any purpose.
Yeah,
is
so the
something entirely
metaphors,
new.
the metaphors completely break down.
Yeah.
So it's been, war.
Right.
War does not work.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a defined beginning. There's not an enemy.
Right.
There are no non-combatants.
Right. Everybody's
Part of it, and it doesn't have a definable end.
Yeah,
That doesn't work. It's a cultural and societal transformation. So we at some level we know that, and we shrink from it.
Right.
So,
well, I think
so that's
part of it is
it.
that it's happening in tandem with changes in technology, which are similar in magnitude and scope. And
But part of the untruth of climate change is that we can technologically fix this.
yeah, but you know what I
We
mean in terms
cannot.
of like I can get a text message from somebody
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Uganda,
Yeah.
or I can see somebody on
No,
Facebook.
that's all, and that's helpful.
That's part of this whole thing.
It's part of this
And
whole
I think
thing.
it's not just helpful; it's harmful too.
It's
I mean,
harmful
because
too.
there's a way in which you can spread misinformation in a way that just wasn't
Right.
possible before.
So the other part of the misinformation is that the question, who benefits?
yeah, yeah,
And there's a tremendous new book called The Great Derangement by an Indian novelist, prominent Indian novelist, Amrit Ghosh. But it's a nonfiction book. And he points out that city management at coastal cities all over the world, they absolutely know
Right.
that allowing the massive building close to the shore, this very desirable, is completely wrong. They all know this.
yeah.
But as he points out, it is real estate lobbies that are keeping them quiet and allowing this to happen.
Right, right.
So you can ask, just to be completely blunt, when Tom Price was removed from the cabinet
Right.
for overspending grossly, and so on, if you add up the misspending and the accusations against Scott Pruitt, why is he still in position?
Right. Right.
Well, he's in position because he's doing what benefits people who want to make more money from deregulation.
Right. Right.
So deregulation, when did it start? It started with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring over 50 years ago. And I went back and reread Silent Spring as part of my studies at CIIS, and it's such a beautiful book,
Yeah.
so beautifully written. It's also devastating.
Yeah.
And this started, it was truth. She was telling the
Right,
truth
right, exactly.
about what we were concealing from ourselves in our society. The USDA, the soil conservation people, everybody was saying, no, this is okay.
Right.
It's okay.
DDT
Won't
doesn't
hurt
have
you.
lasting effects.
Won't hurt your babies. I mean, it was horrifying stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the environmental movement begins, Earth Day begins, 1970, and regulation begins. The EPA gets started. And all that is being undone. So who doesn't benefit? All of life.
Right.
In terms of labor and the environment. The big lesson to me about this was Haiti. So Haiti was the most profitable slave colony in the Caribbean. Why? Was it more profitable than everywhere else? Because the people doing the work, African slaves, and the land itself were both treated as non-human
Right.
resources to be used and discarded.
Yeah.
So you can make enormous profits when there are no regulations
Right.
on how you treat people and how you treat the land and the water and the air. So that's what's going on. So those are the two things. We're fooling ourselves, and we have some people who are deliberately working to
Fanning those
misinform
flames,
us because
you
they benefit.
testified at the EPA about just
The Clean
yeah.
Power
Could you talk a
Plan.
little bit about what that experience was like? Because I mean, one of the things I like about it is that it's not like you just gave up. Do you know what I mean? You're still you want to be engaged, and you're still engaged.
Right.
You're not letting people forget. It's not like you washed your hands of the federal government and you feel like we can't.
We can't.
Yeah.
I would
So
never
what
do
was
that.
it? What was that
Yeah.
like? I
So
mean,
that was really great. This was the work, as I understand it, one of the last benefits to us from our late mayor,
yeah, right.
from Ed Lee.
Lee.
So there was one day or period of testimony planned on doing away with the Clean Power Plan, and it
Yeah.
was planned for the coal area in West Virginia. And they were sure that they would get people to come and say, oh, this is fine, get rid of the Clean Power Plan.
Right.
And Ed Lee objected and said, no, you have to follow these regulations, and we need to have broader availability for citizens to step forward and say what they think about the Clean Power Plan.
Yeah.
And thus we became a site, San Francisco.
Right.
And I was there with Interfaith Power and Light
Yeah.
and other groups, and it was powerful. There were hundreds of San Franciscans and Bay Area people, experts, deeply committed citizens, activists, all came forward to speak the truth about clean power.
Yeah,
It was really great. And, it doesn't actually matter if we get ignored or if we fail in one
In that
instance.
moment, yeah,
We have to just keep applying ourselves
definitely.
to it.
Yeah, it was funny because as all these things happened, I wanted to ask you about them. We just didn't have the chance.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Life
one
is
of the things,
moving.
life is moving. I mean, I want to hear more about the UN conferences, the COP conferences, and just how that's changing over time, and then just what is it like on the ground to be in Marrakesh, for instance, where everybody's there, or Paris, or and what is it like to be among that number of people? And what do you learn at these different events?
So much. Let me tell a very human story.
Yeah.
I was just in Bonn again
exactly,
for
yeah.
a follow-up climate meeting. And this was very different than our experience in Paris, Marrakesh, or Bonn last fall in Bonn, because at the COPs, the delegation, Sheila and I and others are representing the Bishop Curry, and we have things to do. We ran a booth. We have daily worship. We have hearings to go to. It's busy.
Yeah.
This SB 48, this follow-up meeting in Bonn 3 weeks ago, it was just I. I wasn't part of a team.
Yeah.
And I had no things to do. So I just listened. I went to a lot of meetings, but I also sat with people and listened to them. And one of the negotiators, so this is a guy who teaches, let's see, what is his area? He's a hydrologist in Suriname.
Wow.
And he's a technical advisor to the negotiating team. So he's on the official team for Suriname. And he talked to me over lunch about his life. So the negotiators may seem like they're just at this abstract level.
Right.
And he said, in Suriname, I lecture, I do my research, but I feel like it's so important for my students to know that I really believe this and to actually make practical help. Right. So he has worked on protecting the mangrove forest from sea level rise. So what he's done is create a permeable barrier that will allow the nutrients and the tides to move through the mangrove, but also somehow, I don't know how he did this, protect the human communities from flooding and inundation. And then up in the highlands, where indigenous communities live, he's worked on small-scale hydroelectric that is environmentally sound. So these two things he's doing at a very practical level, as well as working at this abstract level. And then he talked about, well, what is that like? What is it like to work with these communities, fishing communities on the coast? They won't participate. Why? Because it's not bad enough yet.
Wow.
If the fishing is around my village has played out, there's still enough that without it being too burdensome, I can take my boat just far enough and get. So I'm not invested in this. And I said, well, what about the sense of, they know it's happening, they see, he said, yes, they know that it's changing, and they know it's going away, but they work so hard that their margin of energy is so small that even the concern about their own children and next generation, they don't have it.
Yeah.
So this was a very, lived, real testimony. And in terms of the Highland indigenous communities, 1 barrel of oil being sent to the indigenous community. So he's trying to get them off of the oil, right, to these small-scale hydroelectric projects. 1 barrel of oil turned into just gallons by the time it got to them, because it gets taken by people on the way. And I said, my immediate reaction was, that's terrible. He said, no, it's the reality. The people on the chain, on the way, they need it too.
Yeah.
So by the time it gets up to these indigenous communities, like the Guarani, there's very little left. So this is a picture of who comes to these climate talks. These are not just academics. I don't mean to put it that way, but these are people who are so passionate about the fate of the human community and of the life community, that they are doing everything they can at the negotiation level and at the lived level of their lives.
I think it's really important. I mean, there's a political aspect to this, and that is huge. I mean, in terms of how do we work this out? How do we negotiate? How do we figure out what's fair? How do we make change that really can happen?
That's great. So we're in the middle of a year of what's called the Talanoa Dialogues, and this comes from your
totally
world.
Thinking about that too.
Talanoa is a process that, if you know Ubuntu or Indaba, but Talanoa comes from Fiji, and it's a community decision process.
Right.
And we're in Hawaii,
this. In Hawaii, it's called ho'oponopono.
In Hawaii?
How do
so
you
what does that mean?
It means like the word pono is like the word for righteousness.
Okay.
So it's like, how do you make things right
a righteous
again? How do you make
decision?
things righteous again? Yeah. How do you get
Restore
things back
balance.
into balance? Yeah.
Wow, great. So that's what the Talanoa Dialogue is.
Yeah.
And part of why I was in Bonn 3 weeks ago, Purdue University and 4 other universities in the UK and in Scotland and in the United States put together a gamification of the climate negotiations.
Wow.
So they ran this for a 3-hour period, and each of us invited to take part were a country. I was Dominican Republic. And we made rounds of decisions, like how much money will Dominican Republic put into mitigation? How much will it put into the International Climate Fund?
Yeah.
And then we look at tipping points. So this is super, super important. We are not in a steady state. This climate disruption, more and more disruption is coming, more and more uncanny events.
Yeah, so it's not a linear process. It's more like
it's definitely not a linear process. It feeds back and it's intensifying. And they would look at our decisions. Where are we putting the money? What are we doing with it? And then they would say, okay, was this enough to prevent this tipping point? Like the going over the level of bleaching of coral reefs that where it can't come back.
Right, or killing all the fish so that you can't ever have the fishery again.
Or certain of the ice melts and so on.
You just destroy all the redwood forests in Northern California.
Yeah, there's a terrible statistic about that. So we ran these as rounds and saw what happened. And we're not making, even with the decisions being maximized, we were behind.
Yeah.
And some of these tipping points were passed.
Yeah.
And then we did a story, moving from these negotiations and gamification. We were presented in groups of 3 or 4 with a scenario. And I was in a group where we represented advisors to the mayor of Miami in 2025.
Wow.
After yet another Category 5
hurricane
storm. And the question is, are we going to leave this city?
Wow, just abandon the city.
Yeah, and this is a real question, right? At that level. They'd already had lots of relocation, people leaving.
Yeah.
This is happening now, and we are not making any kind of thoughtful plans. So, but I also want to say something super positive. About it's time for me to, right? About the truth about climate change is that this is, in fact, the greatest moment of potential for humanity.
Yeah.
Because Irenaeus, as you well know, said in the 3rd century that the glory of God is a human life fully lived, or the glory of God is a fully alive human.
Yeah.
I think he was thinking too small. The glory of God is a planet of humans fully alive working together. It's the body of Christ as a communal, collective event. And this has never happened.
Right.
We've never been called on to do something
to pull together at that
so.
Well,
so this is our moment.
Yeah, well, that's part of what I love to hear. I mean, you've talked about the person you met from Suriname. I mean, you've met people from Pacific Island nations.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if you can talk. I mean, you've met so many people around the world and heard their stories, and they've become part of your own identity. I was really interested in hearing you talk a little bit about the Dakota Pipeline and just the people that you met there too. Like, how? I mean, now that you have a little bit of time this past since the protests and your participation there, how does it feel different? Who are the people that you remember? What does it mean to you when you look back on it?
Well, I love that question. So the Dakota Access Pipeline protest was a beautiful thing to me, because when I chose to stay, as you remember, there were 3 campgrounds. There was the big one on the federal land. So that was very vulnerable.
Yeah.
It was very big.
Right.
But it was also, they could be moved out.
Right.
There were 2 campgrounds on the reservation, Standing Rock. And I chose to be there. The one I went to, you had to go through the other one. So I walked and walked and walked with my backpack and my tent. And when I got, there was a checkpoint. I think you remember this. And there were a bunch of young Lakota people and some of their allies at the checkpoint. And they teased me. They gave me a hard time, as the Lakota do. But they had signs up, and it said, no guns, no knives, no drugs, no alcohol, only prayer. Well, to me, this was the most meaningful thing of the 4 days I was there, because the tools of nonviolence are the way that we're going to do this transformation. We cannot use the tools that have been created to make this problem to undo this problem. We must use the tools of love and prayer and our spiritual lives in Christ to do this. And that too is a beautiful thing. There was this beautiful film, a documentary about Les Chambons, the little community in the Pyrenees in France that saved 5,000 Jews during World War II, and it's called Weapons of the Spirit. And these French, mostly Protestants, in this small village, saved all these Jewish refugees from the Nazis and from the collaborators in France with entirely creative, loving, nonviolent means. And this filmmaker was the son of 2 of the people who had been saved.
Wow.
And he called it Weapons of the Spirit. So when we hear that term, the problem with it is that we immediately think of weapons. But when we call it Weapons of the Spirit, it maybe jogs us a little bit to think, what's the difference between a gun and a weapon of the Spirit?
Well, it also makes you, I mean, what you're raising is just, I mean, part of the problem is our poorly developed spiritual life. I mean, that's part of what brought us to this place.
It's kind of like the heart of the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, when we look at yet another horrifying, heartbreaking shooting, this time in Santa Fe, Texas, outside of Houston, we need to be asking the question, not only do we need to resolve to not listen to crazy ideas like arming teachers and just security around, we need to get rid of the guns, but we also need to ask the spiritual question that you're asking is, why is this happening? Over and over and over again. And it's not just the guns. The access to the guns is a problem that we must address, but we also must ask, why are people arming themselves like they're commandos going into a dangerous place and going to kill children.
Right, right.
Sometimes they're peers, but not sometimes they're peers.
Yeah.
You know, it's adults going into schools too.
Yeah.
There's something deeply deformed about our spirits, and we have to say it's our spirits.
Yeah, and that was part of my gut response, was just like, a school is a place. So I mean, you're a teacher for all those years. I mean, a school is a place that's so filled with hope and energy for the future, and that's what's, I think, so heartbreaking. Makes it especially heartbreaking when, you know, you have this terrible epidemic.
And maybe that's what's missing. Maybe, you know, we know that the tenderness and the hope of children is not there for a lot of people. And I actually don't know the answer to this, but I think we need to do what you're saying and apply ourselves to looking as deeply as we can as what is our spiritual life like, that we are living unsustainable lives.
Yeah.
You know, there's this way to estimate how beyond our sustainable lives that we're living, where we say, how many planets would it take
Right, exactly.
if all of us lived like this?
Yeah.
And the first one I saw was Marin.
Oh yeah, right.
So Marin's, you know, it's prosperous for sure, but it's also conscious about a lot of 4 worlds.
4 Earths.
4 Earths.
To
If the
sustain
whole Earth
everybody
lived
at
at the
Marin
consumption level of Marin, and it's more for San Francisco.
Yeah.
And if you think about how well we do, right, you know, with composting, recycling, so then, and you realize we're still living way beyond what would be sustainable for the planet. This gives us a picture of what's necessary. You know, so when I say this is implicating us all, I mean me. Yeah. You know, it's like I'm living way beyond. Yeah. Oh yeah, completely. The consumption levels that I need.
Michael Curry asked everybody in the audience at the royal wedding, "How did you get here? Did you get here by car?"
A few carriages, he said.
A few carriages, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Controlled fire. That was
for him, though. I just
amazing.
felt like he wasn't getting any love back. Do you know what I mean? Everybody should have been nodding their head or raised their hand or said yes or something.
That was the hardest question. I knew it was going to come last night on the BBC the after interview, where they said, "Well, what about all those looks on the royals' faces while he was preaching?" And I knew they wanted me to say,
Something
they were bad or whatever. I said, well, they're just not used to this.
Well, also, you just never know what's going on with people.
You don't know.
You just can't.
And thankfully, because of my very meticulous science, Myers-Briggs J wife, Sheila, there was a lot of coverage that she had brought in front of me, and I saw one piece where Camilla was laughing at one of Michael's jokes, and I was like, I referenced that, you know, because they wanted to say, she was angry and all that. So I saw one laugh.
So one of our traditions at the forum is we take questions. So if you'll all have little notepads or little note papers on your seat, and Rebecca Nessel can collect your questions. You know, one of the great things about having you have this passion for the environment, passion for reversing climate change, is that it's not just you. You're part of a 60 million person Anglican communion.
88 million.
88 million? Oh my gosh.
We grew.
See, you just got to check.
Well, Nigeria didn't leave.
Oh, that's
one of the things.
That's good. So 88 million Anglicans around the world.
Yeah.
And I have a lot to do with the Anglicans who are like in this room, but you have a lot of to do with Anglicans around the world. And what does this look like in places like South Africa or Hong Kong?
That's great. Well, 2 things. One, Rowan Williams, when he was Archbishop of Canterbury, said it takes a global body to address global problems.
Yes, exactly. That's
brilliant.
That's
great,
I like that,
right?
Yeah.
That means we are in a beautiful position, not alone.
Right.
We're the 3rd largest Christian body in the world after Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
But Anglicanism is big, and it's everywhere, almost everywhere. And so we're in a position and a responsibility to do this. It's a global problem. We're a global body.
Yeah, I love that.
I really love that. Plus, the Episcopal Church itself, our formal name is Episcopal Church USA, but as you know, we are actually 16 countries.
We are global.
So yeah, we're global. Just our province of the Anglican Communion, our province is 16 countries. Right. So I think most people here in
By the way, every time you say, there's so many things I forget. I mean, I didn't even know that at all. But thanks for giving me the benefit of the doubt. So
16 countries.
16
Right,
countries.
right.
That's amazing.
like Hawaii.
Yeah.
That's a country, right?
Okay. I'm just not going to go on the record on that.
No, but Micronesia is part of the Episcopal Church.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
so the water level rise is part of our church
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Similarly, I think most people in the Diocese of California know that Haiti is part of the Episcopal Church USA.
Right, of course.
Okay, so we get that. But did we know that Venezuela is?
Yeah, Venezuela.
So all the trials of Venezuela, every time we read about that,
Wow.
each day,
That
like
is
something
us.
horrifying is happening in Venezuela with the water, with the politics, with the heat, with everything. And we look at that and go, that's them.
Yeah.
And perhaps we think that. But it's truly us at the human level,
Right.
always. But it's us in a more intimate way. It's part of the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an Episcopal Diocese of Venezuela, and it's part of the Episcopal Church USA.
Yeah.
Their bishop is part of our House of Bishops.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. So the other Anglican piece of this is that when the climate talks in Bonn denied the funds for the Pacific Island nations and provinces and states, that was us.
Yeah.
I met Anglicans, and they're already losing their lives.
Yeah.
So I felt that in a way, it was something I could feel intimately.
Right.
Because I met archdeacons and priests and lay people who are living a faith life that is my faith life.
Yeah.
And I've told this story, but one atoll that these folks came from that I was talking with in Bonn, actually that was in Marrakesh, 2 villages on the island and one is gone already. And they talked about, what does that mean? Well, it means that, you have a bicycle route to Grace Cathedral.
Completely.
And
I go there every day.
And you see certain things, that flowering tree that you saw.
Right.
And you see people. There's a network of people that you see.
Yeah.
Well, that's no longer the case for them. They've all been relocated, so your network of life is gone. The other thing that they said was, well, the Anglican Church is still standing. The water hasn't inundated it, but they can't go there. They don't live there anymore, and the cemetery is underwater.
Wow.
So their ability to visit their ancestors in a physical way and lay a wreath or put some flowers or say a prayer, it's gone. So this is something, that you can feel in your human life, this kind of loss.
Yeah. And I think that's important to connect us to that. So, and to connect them to us too.
Yeah, so for the advocacy piece,
Yeah.
We're going to really try hard to support our brothers and sisters in Pacific Island countries because they are more intimately connected to us. I feel this more, right? So when Australia and the United States say no, we don't want to start to assume the cost of what it's going to mean for total loss and damage for these. We, part of the United States, but also part of a transcendent body of Christians, are going to say, no, this is not the right answer.
Yeah.
We need to acknowledge our role in this. We've got an outsized role in creating this problem. We need to have an outsized role in helping solve it.
Resolve it. So I have a bunch of questions. We're going to have to start moving a little bit more quickly. Humans are becoming extinct because of nuclear war, earth climate abuse. But what is God's role in creation? How do we discern God at work in these terrible things that are happening? That's the best I can do to summarize that. It's a little bit more of a longer one.
Well, obviously I don't know.
Yeah.
But Michael referred to Desjardins beautifully in his in his sermon at the royal wedding, and Desjardins believed that we are moving to this omega point. And when Sheila and I were introduced to centering prayer about 35 years ago, it was one of the founders of centering prayer, Basil Pennington, who was speaking.
Of course. Wow.
And he said, he was a deep student of Desjardins, and he said, I have faith that even if the human race disappears as a species and the earth goes in a conflagration, that we will still be brought to this fullness, this pleroma, this
The telos.
the end of what
the goal.
this perfect goal.
Yeah.
How can he say that?
Yeah.
And so this is a mystery, and it doesn't absolve us from the absolute dedication of our work in the moment. And there's a belief that God is faithful.
Yeah. What chance do we have if even in a city like San Francisco, we won't ask people to stop driving cars? Even a place of pure caring like Grace Cathedral offers a parking garage and choice and the neighborhood traffic with kids being dropped off at the cathedral school. So what do we do in San Francisco? I mean, in particular, our local, what is our local response to?
This is such a good question. This is that, this is facing into the massive change that it's going to take. This is not going to be just tweaking. It's going to be a massive change. Okay, so I would say, this is what I've been saying to people like our friend Owsley Brown when we're talking about this.
Yeah.
I think the soul of the Bay Area is in tatters right now.
Yeah.
I'm deeply, deeply concerned. The aggressivity that we can feel in our city is way, way up.
It is.
Sheila and I have only been here for just over 12 years, and it has changed profoundly in the time we've been here. Why I'm saying that is it can change, but we have to take it on collectively.
Right.
We actually have to say, as we said after the '06 quake, after the '89 quake, during the AIDS crisis, we have to collectively say we're going to confront this. Right now, we're just saying, oh, it's not so good. We're not actually saying, what is it going to take for us to change this?
Right.
It's completely doable. I also think we have to face our past. At Mayor Lee's funeral, I was honored to have a role, and there was a gathering of all the participants and invitees in the mayor's office, and it's the first time I met Congresswoman Barbara Lee. I've admired her for a long time, and I've worked with other of our representatives. And just in the course of the conversation, she said, I think we need a truth and reconciliation process for the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So I say that, I've said this to you, Malcolm.
Yeah, I agree.
Truth, this is the year of truth. What would it be for us to look unflinchingly at our past as a place that prides ourselves on having progressive values and not being the place where all those bad things happen?
Right, you're exactly right.
We've had a lot of bad things of our past that have put us in a privileged position today, and until we look at them together and tell the truth about them, it's hard to imagine how we could transform in the way that this person asking this question
Yeah, we had
has.
Kim Shuck, the poet laureate for San Francisco, who's a native person. She's a Cherokee Nation person, and talking about public art. And
Truth-telling through public art.
Yeah, exactly. And truth-telling about public art that's offensive, too.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's really
Wow.
good. Do you see an increasing number of young people of color joining the eco-justice movement, and how will more of them become involved?
That's a great question. I would say at the global scale, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's mostly a brown world.
Right, exactly.
And when we were in Marrakesh, the really beautiful thing was that we do these public meditations and worship each day in the middle of the public space. So hundreds and hundreds of people walking by, and we're just there singing our chants and doing our meditations on the spiritual values that underlie climate action. And dozens, up to 60, some days, of young Muslim adults joined us.
Neat.
And what they say, it was super.
Oh my
and
gosh,
we planned
great, 'cause
our worship,
60's a
big
great,
number.
yeah.
And we planned our worship for 30 minutes. They would sit down and talk with us for 2 hours.
Wow.
And what they said, this was beautiful. They were mostly architecture and environmental engineering graduate students, women and men.
Yeah.
And they said, we know how to do this technically. We're looking for the spiritual.
Wow.
So, so people of color are in it.
Yeah.
It's happening in the United States. People like Bryant Terry.
Right.
In
Well, I
Oakland.
think of our eco-justice conference last year.
Yeah. That was fabulous.
That was fabulous.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the Eco Justice Conference last year, we have the We're Still In conference coming up in September.
Yeah.
And maybe you can tell us just like what makes you excited about it. I mean, that's my question. That wasn't on this.
Okay. So We're Still In. This is an enormously important movement.
Yeah.
When Donald Trump became president-elect, while we were in Marrakesh,
Right.
the We're Still In movement was born. I was in a Climate Action Network meeting the next day. We're bleary-eyed and like shocked that a climate denier is the president-elect of the United States.
Yeah.
And one of these scientists said, we can keep the U.S. commitment to the Paris Agreement without the federal government.
Wow.
We're still in.
Yeah.
That's where it started. So
you were there.
Yeah, I was at the
Ground zero.
moment of its birth. But it means actually taking responsibility at the individual and collective level, and not saying. So this is great. It's truly going to be a grassroots movement. Governor Brown is the main leader of this, along with the governors and the legislature in Oregon and Washington State and New York.
It's funny because I've been thinking so much about the convocation service, the gathering that's here at Grace Cathedral.
Yeah.
I haven't been thinking much about the rest of the program, almost to the point where I just don't know.
I love that you said that, because originally We're Still In was this: cities, states, regions, and businesses.
Oh, there's
and they just kept saying this over and over and over again. And it was in Bonn when I said, what about faith bodies?
Yeah.
They've added that. But no faith bodies have stepped forward as a total body yet. So that's what we're waiting on. There will be 5 resolutions that come to the General Convention of the Episcopal Church, all on the Episcopal Church committing itself to the Paris Agreement.
Wow.
I am sure we will pass one.
Yeah.
And then we will be the first, as far as I know, major religious body to commit as a whole body to the Paris Agreement.
That is amazing. So
but what will we do?
Right.
What will we do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a huge summer, I mean, in terms of advocating for that and being the person whose people ask questions about for
I
it.
don't know. No, I hope
big.
not.
Please tell us what you know about the September. Oh, that was the same question I just asked.
September the 12th is the service here in Grace Cathedral. It's an interfaith service. Sally Bingham and I and people from the governor's office and DioCal office and from Green Faith and Mission 2020 are working with the cathedral. Jeffrey Holcomb's at every meeting to put this service on. All the world's religions are represented, including indigenous religions, and it's going to be super beautiful.
Yeah. So Mark, help us understand the relationship between climate change and income inequality.
The relationship is very simple. We are consuming far more in the United States than our population is the proportion of the world.
Right.
And interestingly, Martin Luther King warned about this over 50 years ago. He said that our foreign investments were too profitable, that it was unbalanced, and that we would be bringing too many resources into the United States to unbalance, and then it gets unbalanced within our own culture, right? So it's globally unbalanced.
You know, what's so important about Martin Luther King's message, I think, is that people, we care, we in our actions and the words that we say, everything, we care too much about what happens to Americans and not enough about happening.
And he became a global citizen.
In Mexico and El Salvador.
He got his biggest pushback as he expanded his commitments. Right? So stop meddling in things you don't know about, they told him. Poverty, the war, global well-being.
Yeah, exactly. What would you like to say to children, to your great-grandchildren, if they could ask you, what did you do to stop climate change?
Wow. Well, what I hope I would be able to say, I cannot say today.
Yeah.
Which is that I would have changed my life in a way that would make their lives possible.
Yeah.
I think that's what I need to be able to say.
Right.
Yeah. And it's going to be different, right, than a discrete thing. When I was arrested, Sheila and I arrested protesting the Iraq War soon after we moved here, one of the bishops of the Episcopal Church said, his son said, Dad, why aren't you doing that?
Right.
And that's this one discrete action.
Right.
See, I mean, that's so easy compared to the transformation of a life.
Yeah. And the transformation of your own life within this context of other people's
Right.
expectations,
Right.
et cetera. Okay, so this is, some say that we are well beyond the tipping point by, by intentionally advocating business as usual regarding all businesses, including fossil fuel industries. Do you agree?
Yeah. We are beyond certain of the tipping points already. Collectively, we have missed, the window, has been closing for 5 years.
Yeah.
On, what do I mean by that? To avoid the worst instabilities of climate change, we had a 5-year window starting with Paris.
Yeah.
And we're behind. So we will not avoid some terrible outcomes. We will not avoid some terrible outcomes, but that doesn't mean that our work is meaningless. We can still mitigate. We are going to they're already coming. The environmental refugees from the Pacific Islands are already coming to California and to the West Coast. So part of the answer is, how do we welcome them? This is going to be Australia with Fiji.
Yeah.
Fiji is going to disappear along with other islands, and probably they will relocate. Their lives will move to places like New Zealand and Australia. At that point, we will have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to welcome the stranger?
Yeah.
These are people who have lost their culture, lost their lives, lost the places where they've lived for up to 4,000 years in the case of Fiji. So the answer is going to be different. Maybe we can't stop. We will not be able to stop that from happening, the waters from inundating that, but we can then ask what do we do to plan for the movements north,
Right.
when people can't live in Phoenix or in Texas or in Los Angeles, what are we just going to passively watch people move with a low income to northern places without jobs, without infrastructure, or are we going to plan for that?
Right.
So this is part of
Yeah, so
the
adjusting.
adaptation and mitigation that we need to be planning for.
Yeah.
So it's not just stopping, it's adaptation and mitigation.
Right. Those are important parts. We have. I've been thinking about this so much this last week because I've been kind of planning for you to be here, and I wanted to ask you 2 questions, and you have to preach in like half hour, so I want to.
What?
I know. He does that, and my heart kind of stopped for a second.
So did mine.
But so maybe you could say something about kind of your biggest frustrations in this, and maybe we can conclude with some of your hopes for the future.
Well, I think the frustrations are that we continue to hide the truth from ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I've told the story many times about Sheila Sisulu, who was the ambassador from South Africa to the United States, and I won't go through the background, but she said that wherever she visited in the world, people said, we need Nelson Mandela for our country to lead us into justice and truth. And she would say, no, he was created from the soil and the people of South Africa. He is made for South Africa.
Wow.
If you want your leader for justice and truth, go look in your prisons.
Wow.
Because that's where we had Mandela.
Yeah.
That's a very challenging thought, to say that where we have hidden people away
Right.
from our own sight may be our salvation.
Right.
So where the slaughterhouses are with factory farming,
Yeah.
where people are in prisons, where we have put down blinders over our own knowledge of what's going on with climate degradation and eco-justice problems, in those places of looking with light, the light of love, we may find our salvation.
Yeah.
That's an amazing thought.
That is an amazing thought.
Yeah, so maybe that's my most hopeful thought too.
Yeah.
If we'll look in these places. So this is the Jesus story, right? I mean, where were the shepherds surprising people in themselves, sent to look for the new king?
Right, right.
You know, not in the king's palace,
Yeah.
but in a humble place,
Right.
an obscure place.
A surprising place.
A surprising place. And so this goes all the way through the New Testament, right? Paul's in jail, and
Right.
and he's liberated by a spirit who comes within the place of shadow and imprisonment and liberates from within. So, you know, I think this, maybe if we did these things, if we visited watersheds that we don't visit, you know, so this is a pleasant thing. This is a pleasant idea in some ways. Like, go where we don't go, look where we aren't looking, think what we're not thinking, and our hope may be in those places.
Right, right. Wow, that's great. It's been such a pleasure having you here today.
Huge pleasure for me.
Yeah, we're really grateful that you.
It's wonderful to be with you, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you. It's the Year of Truth is fully underway here.
Yeah.
And this is such an important element to it.
And it's in today's gospel.
And it's in today's gospel, great.
The way, the truth, and the life.
The way, the truth, and the life, that's perfect.
And Jesus
It's in a
says
lot of these
puzzling things
readings.
about what do those mean.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't actually answer his questions.
Oh, I like that too.
Yeah. So, and nor will I.
So this is our last. I was getting my hopes up. This is our last forum of the spring season. We'll be getting together for the forums again in September, and the truth will be our theme through the rest of the year. You can support the forum by giving a gift on the way out, and Mark will be preaching at the Pentecost service upstairs, the 11 o'clock service. We're having
And
baptisms.
we're
It's gonna
baptizing
be,
21.
yeah, it's going to be a great day. We're
gonna
having
be amazing.
an amazing day.
Don't be scared off.
Yes, I will. Thank you. So there are statements about from the American Meteorological
Thank you so
Society
much.
that are on the back table. Go ahead and have a look at that. It's something, I mean, all of us, whenever we meet people who are out in the world, I mean, we need to understand what's going on with climate change in order to be informed citizens. So we're lucky to have friends in the American Meteorological Society who help us to be informed. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you so much, Mark.
Happy
for
Pentecost, everyone.
Yay.
Yay.